Hello. I'm glad to be able to share something with you this Good Friday, albeit remotely rather than face to face. As I've been reflecting on the events leading up to Jesus' crucifixion over these last few days, something rather significant has struck me. Jesus knew, probably more than any of us ever will, even in these unprecedented days of isolation, what it meant to be stripped of all he had. I invite you, whether you're at home alone in these times or with your family, just to stop and reflect for a moment on the losses and isolation Jesus experienced on those last few days before his death. You may like to stop and read the Passion narrative in Mark 14 and 15 as you reflect on this question. And if you're watching this on YouTube, do press pause as you reflect. So I wonder what you've come up with. Here are just a few of my thoughts. Jesus was stripped of his rights to justice. He didn't have a fair trial. He didn't have people to speak up for him and denounce those who were accusing him. It simply wasn't fair. I wonder how many of us have felt like that at any time in our lives, never mind right now. When did you last find yourself saying or thinking, "It's not fair"? Jesus was quite literally stripped of his clothes. Our reading from earlier tells us that the soldiers divided his clothing amongst them. He was stripped of his friends. One of his disciples, Judas, betrayed him. And do you remember how when he asked his disciples to stay awake and pray with him in Gethsemane, they simply couldn't do it? And then just before his trial, the disciple Peter denied him, in effect distancing himself from him. Jesus felt stripped of his connection with God. You may have noticed that verse in Mark 15, chapter 34, when he says, my God, why have you forsaken me?" And of course, what we particularly remember on this day is that he was stripped of his life as he was nailed on a cross to die. Now, of course, that wasn't the end of the story, but we're not going to visit the end today, as it's important that we sit with Good Friday. Come back on Easter Sunday for the next chapter. What I really want us to grasp on this Good Friday, in the midst of our own isolation and loss and uncertainty of stripping away, if you like, is the way in which Jesus embraced his loss. He didn't take Judas off to one side and attempt to reason with him, persuade him to rethink before he betrayed him. He didn't try to run away from what he was being accused of. In fact, the Bible text tells us that Pilate was amazed that Jesus didn't try to defend himself. He didn't attempt to escape his captives. He didn't run away from the agony of the cross. There is something profound here that is so important and yet so hard. I wonder what your natural reaction is when you feel the pain of loss and grief and isolation. I expect for most of us it's to try and find a way to escape the pain. And yet in so many ways, as our world battles COVID-19, our avenues of escape and distraction have been closed to us. We can't get out in the same way we used to do. We can't mix with our family and friends. We can't turn to retail therapy. We can't gather for worship. And so it goes on. And whilst I'm sure we may try to find other ways to escape our painful emotions in the current circumstances, for most of us it will be harder. And therein lies just something of what we can learn from Jesus on this day. He embraced the pain of isolation, betrayal, rejection. He resisted finding ways to escape from his pain. I'm reminded of something that Carl Jung wrote. He said, "One does not become enlightened by imagining figures of light, but by making the darkness conscious." One becomes enlightened by making the darkness conscious. In other words, we grow the most when we sit with, acknowledge and allow ourselves to feel our pain. It can be the hardest thing to do, but also the thing that will ultimately lead to healthy growth in our lives. And of course, and here comes the spoiler alert, we can trust that as we truly embrace the pain of Good Friday, we too will come to know the joy of Easter Sunday. And so I encourage you today, this Good Friday, to sit with God and to name or even write down some of the pain, confusion and anger you may be feeling at the moment. Shout at him if you need to. Cry with him if you need to. But above all, be honest with him, knowing that as you embrace your pain this Good Friday, he embraces it with you and shares in it with you. And as you do that, reflect once again on Jesus' Good Friday, giving thanks to our God who gave up everything for us in order that we may know life. And that truly is something to rejoice about, even in times such as these. God bless you.